Hi, I'm Daisy Jade, and I'm your host here today for FadeIn, presented by Carnegie Screenwriters. And today we're here with Minda Briley. I'm really excited because she is a producer, a filmmaker, and also a member of Carnegie Screenwriters. Now today we're going to talk about your role as a screenwriter. Tell us how you got interested in that.
Well, I started out performing and in college moved on to literary editing. Those two things kind of lend themselves together for screenwriting. The former president of Carnegie Screenwriters, Bob Scott, dragged me to a meeting, and I feel like it was a good fit for me. And I have this amazing story, and so with their guidance, kind of got on board to actually write a big story.
This is regarding your newest screenplay that you wrote for At All Costs. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It is my grandparents' story in World War II. My grandmother being in occupied Norway, and my grandfather being a U.S. merchant mariner in a huge convoy in the middle of the Mediterranean. It was called Operation Pedestal. It's a kind of a lost nugget of the war, a lost story, but it was a very big turning point in World War II. Malta is a little island, and they were the last outpost of Allied support in the Mediterranean. So it was very precious to the Allies to keep them there, but the Axis was kind of squelching them. And Churchill put this huge convoy together to support Malta. It was the largest convoy in naval history and the most heavily defended convoy in naval history. And so my grandfather played a seemingly insignificant part that ended up being a really big, important part of the war. And so this book was written about their story a few years ago, and I approached the publisher and said, hey, anybody gonna make a movie out of this? And there was no development, so I said, let me give this a shot. This is my family. No one's gonna be more impassioned for this story than I am. So I've spent the past 2 years developing it actually into a 5-part miniseries. And so, yeah, I put together a pitch trailer, which I brought, so.
Okay, and we're actually gonna take a look at that trailer right now.
Here we are together, facing a group of mighty foes who seek our ruin. Now prostrate under the Nazi yoke, all classes and creeds await the hour of liberation when they will once again strike their blows like men.
Engage the enemy at first sight, and Godspeed.
This tanker makes it through, and Malta just keeps fighting these bastards. It's not just Malta, it's the Mediterranean.
Where is your husband, Fraulein?
I'm not gonna sit on deck watching bombs fall while they have my wife.
This convoy must succeed at all costs.
Everything is dangerous at war, my friend. Stay alive long enough, and you'll see your wife again.
Wow, that was amazing.
I'm so proud of that pitch video, and it was completely cultivated by Carnegie Screenwriters, our producers and our editor, and so it was just an amazing project to work on, and I'm so pleased.
Yeah, so how else did Carnegie Screenwriters get involved?
Well, I started writing scenes for the screenplay. I initially thought it would be just a feature. And I brought some scenes in and we read them in a meeting, and there was this discussion of how are you going to fit all this in? How is this all going to, the bulk of the story takes place over a week, but it's not just my grandparents' story. It's the story of this convoy. It's
Right.
the merchant sailors. It's the British Merchant Navy. It's the British Royal Navy. It's so many people and so many amazing heroic stories are just fit into this tiny book. It just wasn't going to squeeze into an hour and 20 minutes.
Right.
So we were in the meeting, and one of our members leans over and he's like, "Why don't you just make it a miniseries?" I was like, "Oh, comes the dawn."
Yeah,
like
there you
this,
go.
This great. And I was like, "All right." So I started a breakdown, an episodic breakdown of what needed to happen in so many episodes. It started out as 8 episodes, and I felt like that was running too thin. So now it is 5 one-hour episodes to kind of make a full story arc of the whole convoy, and them. I'm not going to spoil it, but my grandparents both survive, and subsequently my mother was born in 1945. So,
Oh, well, there
you
you
know,
go.
I can't pass that up too much. My grandmother, she'll be 102 in September, and
Wow.
every time, she's phenomenal.
That's incredible.
Greatest generation is the term coined, and she is probably what they had in mind.
Wow.
She every time we talk, she asks, "Is anything happening? Is anything moving forward?" And that's why I made the pitch video. I couldn't just stop having written the screenplay. I was like, we need to keep on
Pushing,
this.
yeah.
Keep on pushing.
So what would be the next step for you? Now that you have this incredible pitch video that displays kind of this heroic story, what is your next step?
I feel like I really need to cultivate the story a little bit more. Obviously, it's 5 episodes. There's a lot of story in there. It's a great time for this story because a little known fact, the U.S. Merchant Marine were offered the GI Bill in World War II, which means they would get all the veteran benefits
Right.
that the armed forces got. After the war ended, they did not get the GI Bill. So these sailors were kind of left out in the cold. They most certainly are veterans, but they were never given veteran status. They were given partial veteran status in 1988.
Okay.
But so now there's legislation coming back up to award them full veteran status and get them a little more recognition. I mean,
Awesome.
I was having this conversation just the other day about the U.S. when the United States joined World War II. Congress passed this amazing bill. It was just a ton of money, like millions and millions of dollars, to join the war effort. And Hitler kind of cheekily said, what's the United States? What's America other than movie stars and beauty queens? And what he underestimated were the steel mills in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
You know, Boeing engines, General Motors, all these companies that retrofitted themselves to make the American war machine. And the Merchant Marine carried all of those supplies to the war site.
Wow.
The Merchant Marine were in the Pacific. They were in the Mediterranean. They were at D-Day. They were at Battle of the Bulge. You know,
Yeah.
they were the original support the troops.
Yep.
And they were huge targets during the war. Hitler knew you can't have much of a war if you don't have a supply chain. So let's take out that supply chain. More merchant mariners died in World War II than any other armed forces, percentage-wise. So they really deserve, I'm not gonna get emotional. They really, really deserve this light that's shown upon them.
Absolutely.
So I obviously feel very emotional about the story. So
Yeah. Well, because it does have such a personal connection, what sort of, I mean, obviously you have family members involved, but what other sort of research did you have to do in order to, get all the facts? And because you sound like you're very knowledgeable of everything as though you were right there.
Well, my husband jokes that we have been, as a family, submerged in World War II for 2 years now. We actually went to Normandy a couple years ago for the D-Day remembrances.
Yeah.
We were in Pearl Harbor last year. I've shaken these men's hands, shared a couple drams of whiskey with them. And there's so many unheard stories.
Yes.
So I would greatly encourage any viewer to, if you know a World War II vet, to get them in front of a camera, get their stories told. Here in Pittsburgh, there's the Veteran Voices of Pittsburgh initiative. They will come and record stories before they're lost. I feel like our family is so lucky to have been approached to have this book written to continue this legacy.
Absolutely,
and there's
yes.
so many that aren't. So we need to keep that going, especially for merchant sailors, because I feel like they were really, really unheard.
Right,
So,
right. Now, I know you have a lot of family members that are excited about seeing this project come to fruition.
Sure.
What other thoughts have they had on it? Are they excited about it? Are they kind of, does it bring up weird memories for them, or just kind of what have their thoughts been on the project?
my family's been very supportive. Obviously, my grandmother thinks that, it's wonderful, because she thinks that this story is much better than a lot of things I see on TV.
Right.
She's quite the film critic. My uncle also is very involved. He actually was with my grandmother in occupied Norway.
Okay.
When my grandmother was in Norway, she was pregnant, and my grandfather left on a ship. Then the Nazis invaded, and because my grandfather was an American, he could not get back into the country, and she and her baby could not get out. So they were separated during the war for more than 2 years.
Wow.
And my grandfather, and you see this a little bit in the story, that he tried everything to get her out, and he was willing to do some pretty crazy stuff, including, if he can get to Shetland and get a boat, he can, sail to Norway. He grew up there. He knows the coastline. He can get her out, and occupied Norway wasn't the worst place to live in World War II, but she definitely felt threatened there, mostly for the safety of her son, because he was half American, and his father was actively working against the Nazis.
Yeah,
so
pretty...
that was a little threat to her. There were actually Nazis living in her parents' home.
Wow.
Yeah, they were building an airfield, and they just needed a house, so they commandeered the first floor of their house and sent her family to live upstairs. And
That's amazing.
I mean, there are absolutely worse circumstances in the war, but that's another part of the book that I think is interesting, and a part of the story that I show is what it was like to live in occupied Norway.
Yeah.
And what, it's another little page of history that we haven't seen yet in film. So
Very exciting. Now, in terms of the production, you have the screenplay, you have the trailer set up. Now, what type of format do you plan on having? Live actors? Do you have? Are you just planning on using voiceover? Like, how is the format of the miniseries itself going to be?
it's fully dramatized.
Okay.
I use the template of Band of Brothers because it is kind of the gold standard in historical miniseries.
Right.
You can't do better than Band of Brothers. So that was kind of my go-to resource of Stephen Ambrose's book being an adaptation, and just the excellence that was put forth in that. I hope I can just get a tablespoon of that in mine. But it is fully dramatized, 5 episodes. Obviously, I don't have the expertise or the budget to produce this. I've worked on a lot of films, but never a big action, big war, big story.
Yeah.
So hopefully somebody will pick it up.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people that are very interested in, World War II and all, especially, if it's a historical situation, but also a tie to somebody that actually is here in Pittsburgh and, has such a connection to it.
Sure.
Which I know you do. Now, how did you find it different doing a historical adaptation for a screenplay as opposed to maybe other screenplays you've written?
Well, that's a great question. The idea of historical adaptation is complicated. Lots of people, use it based on the story by, adapted from the story, based on the book, and you always wonder how much of it is real.
Exactly.
How much is it the imagination of the screenwriter? This book was so thoroughly researched. Sam Moses traveled around the world to talk to the veterans and the mariners involved. They researched at the Imperial War Museum. So I didn't have to do a whole lot to find the story.
Right.
It's there, which made it much easier for me.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'd say about 90% of the story is real. It really happened. It really happened. The hardest part was picking and choosing which stories to use in the miniseries, which characters to use, and how to pare them down.
Yes.
If I told every great piece of this story, it would be a cast of 2,000.
Wow.
So, for example, there's a scene where Fred Larson, Lonnie, and Jack, two of his buddies, go to a bar and they're threatened by some Nazis. And they come back to the convoy. That didn't happen to them, but it happened to sailors in the convoy. But I didn't have time to introduce those sailors and have them have that experience. And then I really didn't have anything about them for the rest of the series.
Right.
So I just put our leads into that role, into that scenario. So a lot of times, characters that are already established take the parts of the historical story.
Gotcha.
But
Okay.
it happened.
Yes.
It happened on the convoy to one of those sailors. And that's kind of how I kept the cast at a minimum, but still kept true to the story. There is one small storyline of people in Malta that I created. It's a fictional storyline because I needed the audience to understand why getting to Malta was so important. I needed them to have empathy for the people in Malta, them being bombarded by, there was something like 54 air raids in a week.
Oh, wow.
They were living in caves. The city of Valletta was just destroyed.
Yeah.
And so I needed my audience to see that devastation, that they were ready to surrender because they were unable to live there anymore. They were starving.
Wow.
So I made up a fictional storyline. But other than that, I tried to be as honest to the story as possible because it's there and it's the truth.
Right.
And it's the true stories of these heroes.
People live through it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so-
absolutely.
I felt it was important to stay as honest to the book as I could. They deserve that.
Yes.
All the veterans deserve true stories being told. So.
Absolutely. Now, what is your goal for the viewer to kind of take from it? How, do you want them to, just gain a knowledge of the history? Do you want them to empathize with people that went, what I guess is your ultimate goal for how you want the viewer to kind of receive once your screenplay does reach it, to the screen?
Obviously.
So. Or even if a reader, just reading the screenplay. Yeah.
I would love, of course, number one is to shine the light of hero on the merchant mariners because I feel like they're totally the unsung heroes here.
Yeah.
But also this really seemingly insignificant part of the war and how it was a key to unlock how the war turned. America had only been in the war about 6 months when this convoy was called for, and Winston Churchill he was struggling. England was struggling in the war, and he really needed a win. And he had approached Joseph Stalin about joining the Allies on a second front, and Joseph Stalin had turned him down because he hadn't been successful. Spoiler alert, when this convoy is successful, they think that is the reason Stalin said, okay, you're not totally losing it here. You've saved this island in the Mediterranean. You are putting in the sacrifice that he felt Russia was putting in, and joined the second front. So this tiny little piece of the puzzle of the success of the Allies is a great story, and I want it to be told. For the viewership, I want you to love these characters as much as I do.
Yeah,
I think they're
absolutely.
great. There's some great guys, just wonderful. Lonnie Dales, Francis Dales, is 18 when he joins. He's fresh out of the Merchant Marine Academy. This is his first convoy. He is just this kid from Georgia, and he gets thrown into the lion's den
Wow.
of this convoy. And he steps to the plate over and over and over again. And it's like, what were you doing when you were 18?
Right.
I know, I was like, where are we going for dinner? What pizza place are we heading to? You know, and here he is. And it's
Really
just
making an impact.
really, absolutely. And this story echoes so many other stories of sacrifice in the war and heroism in the war. And, you know, just good old-fashioned American can-do attitude sometimes, so.
Yeah. Now, did you run into any obstacles while trying to put together this screenplay?
Well, sure. I am not a merchant mariner in World War II.
Right.
So,
It's a little harder to put yourself in their shoes, I guess.
yeah, well, I found a little resistance from older men wanting a younger woman to write this story. I've had to reassure a lot of people that I'm at the heart of it.
Absolutely, yes.
And that's been the biggest. I found a lot of support. The Imperial War Museum in London, the Merchant Marine Academy, everyone answers my crazy questions. Like, what shoes did they wear? What kind of shoes did they wear on deck? What is a Oerlikon gun? What is a Paravane? It's been an amazing amount of research on my behalf. I am not a veteran, and I am certainly not familiar with what do you do when a fire starts on your boat? You know, what do you do? Like, I don't know. So the research has been intense, and I'm sure when when it's all said and done, there's going to be plenty of criticisms like, we would never have done that. But yeah, I hope to be as accurate as I can.
Now, do you have any advice for anybody else out there that may have a personal story, whether it's historical, even, you know, more recent, if they want to, you know, write a screenplay or put their words down to paper?
Oh, I always encourage people to write it down when it's running through your head. Just get your idea down on paper, and people can help you from there. Carnegie screenwriters can help you from there. We've had plenty of people come to meetings and say, well, I have this idea. What do I do now?
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of Carnegie screenwriters. It's such an amazing resource. If you have a veteran, again, Venture Voices of Pittsburgh, write it down, talk to them, ask them about what it was like, what's changed since their time in service. But yeah, that history, we're coming to a point in history where we have generations and generations and generations of people who don't remember the war. It's moving from memory into history for us.
Yes.
And I think we need to grab onto it as best we can, especially in our current political climate. We need to remember why we fight and that it is a tremendous sacrifice.
Absolutely.
To engage. So I hope it's pertinent.
Do you feel like it was easier to break it down into a miniseries rather than a feature film? I know there's so much information, but in terms of writing, Do you feel like it was harder to create those transitions, to break it up between, you know, okay, this is part 1, part 2, part 3, versus just one seamless, screenplay?
Well, it actually was relieving to come to the idea that I just needed to make it as long as it needed to be. Because at the time I was trying to think, oh, I can't put that in there. I can't put that in there. That detracts from my storyline, because I only have so many pages I can write, and it was very constricting and frustrating, because I felt like I was leaving a lot out. So when I came to the, literally just making it a miniseries, it was like, oh, okay, now we have time to tell Freddie Treves' story. Now I have time to develop Roger Hill is a great character.
Yeah.
I have time to put this in there and really flesh it out and really make it a story, a big arc story. And we see these characters really develop now, instead of kind of forcing it all into an hour and 20 minutes. It's now, you really get to fall in love with them and want to be their
whole
friends.
Story,
and, want to be there with them and go along for the ride in the safety of your own home, not on the deck of a ship shooting down airplanes.
Now, do you have a favorite character that you...
Captain Roger Hill. I'm sorry to my grandfather. He's a great guy. He's a great guy, and that's the problem. He is a really nice guy.
Yeah.
Captain Roger Hill is a captain of the HMS Ledbury, and he is such a character. He is described as a British pirate at some points.
Oh.
His crew follow him to hell and back without hesitation, but he defies orders. He has his own story of retribution and redemption that he follows. Like his ghosts that are haunting him, he comes to fruition for at the end. So I could do a series just on Roger Hill. He's fantastic.
Oh, wow.
So it was wonderful to read his book and to get his perspective on Operation Pedestal and to know his backstory as well. So.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, definitely, we appreciate so much you stopping to take the time to tell us all about this incredible screenplay that you've written based off of this book. I'm so excited to hear about your connection personally and how your family has taken it all in, and we're excited to hopefully, see it up on screen someday.
Well, thank you. I am more than happy to get eyes on my project. Obviously, any screenwriter would want eyes on their project. But,
yeah, absolutely. Well, we thank you so much for joining us. Definitely, again, thank you so much to our guest, Minda Briley, and we look forward to seeing you on another episode of FadeIn, presented by Carnegie Screenwriters.